For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Joining us from Rochester Hills in Michigan in the US is Akriti Vasudeva. She's a research analyst at the Stimson Center and editor-at-large of South Asian Voices. Akriti, thank you for your time early in America, your morning, that is.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. It's great to be back.
Great to have you on. Also joining us from London is Ambassador Kanwal Sibal. He's India's former foreign secretary, has been India's ambassador to Russia, France, Egypt, and Turkey. Ambassador Sibal, thank you for your time as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
Ambassador, just, lots happening, lots has happened over this last week or so. Your take in terms of the first in-person Quad meeting and the bilateral that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi will have in terms of, AUKUS and Quad. Are they complementary? Do they take away from each other? What's your take?
Well, the in-person meeting is important. It was announced in March, and it is taking place now, and it will certainly give a boost to Quad, which is a good thing. And at this meeting, they'll be able to review the decisions taken in March and the progress, if any, that was made by the expert groups, the 3 expert groups that were set up. I doubt if all that much progress would have been made in these last few months, but nevertheless, it will be an occasion to assess progress, as also to give a fillip to making quicker progress in the future, and possibly also enlarge the scope of what was agreed to in March. However, there are 2 things which, in a sense, have cast a shadow on this in-person summit. One, of course, is the American debacle in Afghanistan and the manner in which it has been done, and the continued softness that the U.S. administration continues to show to Pakistan, and absolute unwillingness to focus at all on Pakistan's role in handing over Afghanistan to the Taliban, with all the attendant consequences for our region in terms of terrorism and Islamic radicalism and everything else. And number 2, of course, the announcement of AUKUS, which in itself, I don't think in any way materially detracts for the moment from the importance of Quad. And in a larger sense, it is helpful because it will put even more security burdens on China, because they'll have to cope eventually with the Australian nuclear propulsion submarines. And it also would involve U.S. giving to Australia advanced weapons technology, cruise missiles and what have you, underwater technology, which is very important, not only for cables, but also to keep a tab on the movement of Chinese submarines. So all that is very good. But the manner in which it has been announced just before the summit, I think does detract from the focus on Quad, because a lot of commentators and others would tend to believe that this undermines a little bit the security component of the Quad, though of course other aspects of the Quad will continue to move forward, and there will be much more focus in the future on sharing advanced technologies and other things in that framework of the 3 countries, rather than with the Quad framework, because some of the agenda is common with regard to cybersecurity, with regard to advanced technologies and 5G and other things. So I think we'll have to wait and watch what happens. Sure. But the meeting itself is important. Yes, it is.
Akriti, just coming to you, I know Ambassador talked about Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'll come to that a little later. But in terms of the outcomes that are expected, we do know that those STEM scholarships will be announced. But apart from that, in terms of both vaccine or health or the other issues that have been dealt with in the Quad, high-tech, future technology, space, cyber, what is it that would satisfy you as an analyst when it comes out, if it comes out?
Thank you, Amitabh. So I think actually, there has been a lot of momentum and movement in the Quad in the last few months. The Biden administration has specifically placed a lot of focus on the Quad. It's called the Quad, the foundation of American policy in the Indo-Pacific. And all of the other partners as well, India, Australia, and Japan have been gung-ho about elevating the Quad. So I actually won't be surprised if there are very concrete deliverables coming out of this summit, because the focus so much has been on actions to be taken. And I think some early reports that we're seeing from Reuters, etc., quoting US officials, actually suggest that we might see some concrete announcements on infrastructure, on health, on science and technology, potentially also on space and cyber. The announcement that you mentioned is the one that's confirmed, which is a Quad fellowship, which will be awarded to 100 students, 25 from each country, who will be given the opportunity to study STEM, master's or doctoral studies in the US. So I think that's a great kind of investment in the future of the Quad countries working together. But I did want to mention one point, especially about the security elements of the Quad. I think you're not seeing as much on that in reportage and maybe even, some of the statements. But I do think that there is a security element to the Quad. And I tweeted about this too. I think that the fact that India, Australia, Japan, and the US just finished military exercise off the coast of Guam as part of Malabar, focused on anti-submarine warfare operations. The fact that India has logistical and military and cross-servicing agreements with all of these countries, making it interoperable with them. The fact that all of the Quad partners have a liaison officer in India's Information Fusion Center in the Indian Ocean region. I think those are very important, even if they're building blocks. They are important building blocks, which suggest that there is a security element to the Quad. Maybe right now, the more economic and development focused initiatives are being played up, and I think some of this is because the ASEAN countries were a little bit iffy about the Quad when it was more focused on military activities, or for example, we had seen the Quad do humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and counterterrorism tabletop exercises, and so the ASEAN countries didn't want to choose between the US and the Quad. They didn't want to get involved in sort of a military conflict, and so now I think because the Quad has much more of a concrete, tangible, sort of positive agenda that's more focused on non-security elements, those countries are sort of more welcoming of the Quad. But I do still think there is a security element.
There is a security element, Ambassador, as you were pointing out though earlier, in terms of AUKUS. Do you think it kind of takes the spotlight away and in a good way of the security element from the Quad? Do you think it gives India more breathing space, or is there something else to it that you think?
Well, AUKUS is fine, but Australia is going to get these nuclear propulsion submarines in 2040. So between now and 2040, you've got almost 2 decades. And in these 2 decades, Australia, at least for the first few years, will not be able to actually do all that very much in terms of putting pressure on China through their new acquisitions of nuclear propulsion submarines. And then the weaponry is part of the deal. The torpedoes and the missiles and everything else will be part of the package with regard to the submarines, which means it will not be operational or operationally effective till after a gap of several years. So in that period, Quad will continue to have an important security dimension. And in any case, from India's point of view, India will remain very critical to the Quad in terms of maritime security, because India is the only country that can play a very significant role in maritime security in the Indian Ocean. Neither Australia can do it, certainly not Japan, or for that matter, United States. United States is not going to permanently station itself in large parts of the Indian Ocean, except in the Western Indian Ocean, in the Gulf countries. But the rest of the Indian Ocean would be actually the the responsibility for India. And India is ready to do burden sharing. And Prime Minister himself announced during the UN Security Council summit, which was held under the Indian presidency, that India is a net security provider in the Indian Ocean, which means that we are ready to play this role. So I don't think, in that sense, the security component of the Quad is going to be damaged severely because of AUKUS, because of the time frames involved. But the thing is that in terms of the depth of military technology, transfer of military technology, the AUKUS will have much more robustness to it than anything that can happen within the Quad, because I don't think the United States is willing to share technologies which have strong non-proliferation elements with countries like India, or for that matter, Japan.
I'll just get your thoughts, both your thoughts on that issue a little more. But Akriti, when you talk about countering China, there are so many elements the Prime Minister has had, and it's not just I beg your pardon, our Prime Minister, but there have been other bilaterals as well. How important are all of them adding up?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Amitabh. As much as the focus has been on, especially in the US on the Modi-Biden summit, of course, Prime Minister Modi also had bilaterals with Prime Minister Suga and Prime Minister Morrison yesterday of Australia and Japan. And I think those relationships are equally important, especially, I think, the improvement in the India-Australia relationship over the last few years. You'll remember that there were concerns in India because of Australia stands towards China, in the early 2000s, and then later as well. And I think now that those concerns have been mitigated. I think both India and Australia share common interests in the Indo-Pacific. They both have been targets of Chinese coercion, India with the Ladakh standoff and Australia economically. And that has really kind of strengthened their relationship. Both, of course, you've seen the 2+2 that happened between India and Australia just a few days ago. As well as India inviting Australia to the Malabar exercise. So you're going to see much more development of the India-Australia relationship, and I think Australia is important for from the technological perspective, from the natural resources perspective, cooperation in rare earth minerals, etc., and also on education. I think that is again a big focus now of the Quad countries. And similarly, I think India and Japan have probably one of the strongest relationships in Asia. And so, consecutive governments in India have really invested in that relationship. And Japan is actually a really important economic partner for India because it's developing and providing infrastructure options in India's Northeast. It is helping India connect the Northeast to Southeast Asia. It's doing projects in Sri Lanka. So I think these relationships, Ambassador Sibal was talking about burden sharing. This is exactly what burden sharing is for Quad partners. They're not all going to do everything, but these, bilaterals, trilaterals, these other minilaterals, Quad, even France's role is important, even though, it feels like it has been snubbed in the AUKUS deal. But the India-France relationship, again, has strengthened so much over the last few years. And, we've seen France really talk about its Indo-Pacific strategy, about the fact that it has 2 million citizens in the Indian Ocean region, has, 7,000 to 8,000 troops. So I think India is really looking at this holistically, and that's why it's developing relationships with the Quad countries, with France, with the UK, and other countries as well. I found it very interesting that India is also engaging, Chile as part of its Indo-Pacific strategy. So I think, there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, you just see those pictures there of a Subway ad, in fact, where it says non-nuclear powered, $90 billion cheaper subs. But humor apart, Ambassador, I'm just going to take some questions and comments from our viewers. 124 Just Madness, given the public spat between France and the Anglosphere and India and France tending to act independently, will they collaborate more in many spheres despite the bonhomie now between the with the India and the US? Related question from Keshav. Like AUKUS, do you think it's time for India, France, and Russia to come up with something similar? FRINRU. And one more from Varun Pratap, Ambassador, with too many alliances and groupings to check China, will there be counter news? We can leave that for later. The questions that are asked to you, Ambassador, and also technology, when you say America may not be willing to even discuss nuclear power technology for submarines with India, what about France?
What the conditions would be is a different matter. What India's position in this regard would be, again, is something for India to decide, because currently we are collaborating with Russia. And to take Russia out of the program will be a major political step. But my understanding is that France has been looking for opportunities to increase cooperation in the submarine area with India. And at a pinch, it would be willing to share nuclear propulsion technology with us. But India has to take some very hard political decisions. With regard to India, Russia, and France coming together, I don't think that France would be ready to join in any such arrangement. Or for that matter, India would be open to the idea at this stage to form any trilateral relationship of this kind without some very hard preparatory work being done on the ground as to what we hope to achieve through this, because there are very serious problems between EU and Russia, and France can't act alone with regard to relationship with Russia. You will recall that some years ago, France refused to sell the frigates ordered by Russia because of Ukraine and whatever have you. So there is that legacy which continues to exist, and the European opinion, Baltic states and Hungary, not Hungary so much, Poland and even Germany are not particularly keen on snubbing the Americans and going ahead with forging a stronger tie with Russia. So that is out. The first question, I can't recall what the first question was.
You've answered that, Master. And we'll come back to one which I had taken, but I think we should leave for a little later. This China's reaction. But Akriti, in terms of the fracas, the spat, the backstabbing, the words that came out from France, well, now toned down after the Biden-Macron call. October they will meet, though they are trilaterals that are not going ahead. It was scheduled, but. Is the partnerships or the various groupings or bilaterals, trilaterals, plurilaterals in countering China's behavior, was it weakened at all by AUKUS, or do you think that's something in the past now?
So I think we have to kind of wait and watch a little bit what the fallout of the deal is going to be. I think from my perspective, if you look at what the goal of AUKUS is and the goal of the Quad is, it's essentially the same. It is to maintain balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region, to check Chinese aggression and coercion. And so from that point of view, they're complementary. So I don't really see it negatively impacting the Quad, in that way. But I do think that, the US, UK, and Australia will have to work with France to kind of, manage the issues contained therein, because otherwise the India, France, Australia trilateral will be impacted, because you don't want these countries, which are all sort of have overlapping interests and are all working towards the common goal of, balancing the rise of China. There should not be, big differences involving these countries. But I do think that, we've already seen a little bit of climb down from France. France is sending their ambassador to the US back to Washington. So I feel like we kind of have to wait and watch. I do think Australia also needs to do some management of its relationships with countries in Southeast Asia. There have been some concerns raised by Malaysia and Indonesia about, does this mean that Australia is now going to become a nuclear power? So if you're trying to make sure that the ASEAN countries are on your side, you're going to have to manage that a little bit. But I wanted to make one point in response to the previous discussion on India's defense partners and the role of the US. So I do think that transfer of technology has been a sticking point between India and the US, and obviously there are various reasons for that. The fact that India is not a treaty ally of the US, the fact that India has a legacy arms relationship with Russia. On the Indian side, India would say correctly, that Russia is the one that's provided advanced technology to India, not the US, and so it's hard to kind of break those ties. But I think India's actually been smart enough in the last few decades to diversify its partners away from Russia. That's why you've seen more of a focus on Israel, on France. I also think that there's something to be said for the US-India Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. It has existed for the last 10 years. I have been very critical about how slow the progress has been on that. But I think finally we might be at a place where the two sides are actually ready to work on joint development of defense equipment and technology together. We've seen that an agreement was signed in July, if I'm not wrong, on unmanned aerial vehicles development between India and the US. And so does that now open the road for deeper conversations about other technology that the US might be able to provide India? So I just wanted to make that point, and I think we'll have to kind of wait and watch where those pieces fall.
Ambassador, just taking that point further, Bhargav Pandya says, why are we still stuck with Russia when it's buyer-seller relationship? When it's a buyer-seller relationship only, we've seen its true face in the Ladakh face-off. I don't know what that means. We've seen the positive face from the Russians in terms of military hardware. But in terms of diversification of high tech, when you're talking about nuclear-powered submarines, I know you addressed that a little bit earlier, but diversification or Atmanirbhar, what is it that you would be looking at?
In place by force of circumstances. Everything that we need cannot be provided by Russia. And there are certain platforms and technologies which Russia doesn't have of the same caliber as the United States has. As you've seen, for example, with the heavy lift aircraft. The Ilyushin 76 are no match to this C-7 or the C-17s, and we've gone ahead with the Americans for that. In terms of aerial surveillance, the P-18, PI-8 platform is far superior to anything that Russia can give to us. There are certain niche technologies, anti-terror and all that, in which Israel is very competent. And there again, we've gone to Israel. In terms of short, mid-range anti-air missiles for our ships, even for our aircraft carrier and our frigates, again, Israel has proved to be a more effective partner because the Russian technology is not as good. But then when it comes to things like S-400, the Russian technology is superior and much less costly than the American technology. So I think that diversification has taken place, but it's not taken place as a result of any political decision that we have to reduce our reliance on Russia, because that would be a mistake. It has happened on its own, and Russia has taken cognizance of that. At the same time, apart from S-400, we have the other programs with Russia with regard to the manufacture of the Kamov helicopters and the AK and newer versions of AK-47 and what have you. And even now, about 40% of our arms procurements come from Russia. So that relationship is very important. Now that what was said about Ladakh is complete nonsense. In fact, our defense minister had gone to Russia and had wanted Russia to expedite certain supplies that we needed. And Russia assured us, and we got satisfaction on the score. And Russia did this again during the Kargil conflict. And therefore, I don't think we should at all go down the road of diluting our relationship with Russia consciously, either in the defense sector or overall in terms of our interest there. No doubt America also helped us during Ladakh, but so did Russia. And you would recall that the Chinese put some pressure on Russia not to expedite these arms supplies, and Russia completely rejected that. And the fact that they're selling us S-400 is not intended to be used against Pakistan. They know who it is intended to be used against. So in that sense, even the India-Russia defense relationship is important in terms of hedging against China.
Since Ambassador brought up S-400s, Akriti, how do you see the CATSA and waivers, and how does that really sit with the India-US bilateral relationship?
You're asking me?
Akriti, and I'll come to you, sir, after that.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Amitabh. Yeah, I think we spoke about this a little bit the last time I was on your show, I
Yep.
think back in July. And I feel like over the last few months in the US, I've seen kind of mixed messaging from the policy or practitioner community, so and kind of US congressional members. I've seen on one hand some members acknowledge that if sanctions are put in India, it actually will, sort of it'll mean that India will move closer to the to Russia, and be more dependent on Russia for arms, which is exactly what the CATSA, legislation is supposed to avoid. But then others mention that because Turkey experienced sanctions, it will be difficult for the U.S. to domestically sell how if the sanctions are put on Turkey but not on India. So how do you manage that? Messaging. But I will say, the analyst community in the US, which is focused on India, is near unanimous that the sanctions are going to be detrimental to the US-India relationship. And I've heard them make that case in various fora. I think it's well understood that what is going to happen if the US does put sanctions on India is that India is going to sort of lose trust in the relationship. It will think back to the 1998 sanctions or other incidents in the past where the US has not supported India, and it's really going to impact the relationship. And if the US, wants India to have the capabilities to deter China, which is what S-400 is meant to do, like Ambassador Sibal was saying, then it is actually in US interest that India gets that capability. So I think we really have to wait and watch. I think we're going to hear soon enough because the first delivery, if I'm not wrong, is at the end of this year. And so obviously sanctions will likely come into place at that time. But are we going to see a waiver or not, I think is going to be a bit of a political decision on the US side.
Ambassador, if you want to comment on that. And I also wanted your comments on, we've seen the Chinese verbal reaction to developments, whether it's the Quad, other bilaterals, the AUKUS. How do you think China will actually respond? We've seen a different strand where on the same day or a day later, they put in their papers to join the CPTPP.
Well, I don't think China has much of a choice. In fact, the Quad wouldn't have existed if China had not behaved the way it has in South China Sea and provocatively elsewhere, including on our border, even bullying a small country like Bhutan. But basically, the Indo-Pacific strategy and Quad is a result of China's expansionism in the South China Sea. It's confrontation with Japan over the Senkaku in the East China Sea and its constant threats, military threats included, to integrate Taiwan with China. This is the reason why Quad and AUKUS have come into existence. They have to protest, but they have to look inwards and introspect a little more about whether they should now change their policy, which I don't think they will, because they have established clear timelines about how they're going to be on top of the world by 2049. So that is one. With regard to S-400 and sanctions, I think it will be a very serious mistake if United States went down that road. Stimson Center itself has produced a report which I read, giving some very good arguments why the United States shouldn't go down the road. But 2 points in this regard. First of all, we are not an ally of the United States. We are not a member of NATO. All Turkey's armaments are NATO standard. It is a member of NATO. And NATO actually has been created and exists because of the perceived Russia threat. Therefore, that argument is altogether different and doesn't apply to us. And secondly, with regard to consistency, well, the United States thinks that Iran is the biggest terrorist state in the world. We think that Pakistan is a bigger terrorist state, but the United States is able to make that distinction and even hand over Afghanistan to terrorists like Taliban. So I think this kind of argument that they have to be consistent won't wash. It won't persuade us in any case.
Right. Since you, Ambassador, you mentioned Afghanistan and Pakistan at the beginning of the show and towards the end, I just want to play out what the Foreign Secretary Harsh Singla had to say yesterday during his briefing after the Prime Minister's first day of all his bilaterals, his meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, where he had an interesting point to make about what came up with the Vice President.
Array of initiatives that the Quad has undertaken, which is, as I said, designed to cater to the requirements of the Indo-Pacific region. On the other hand, AUKUS is a security alliance between three countries. We are not party to this alliance. From our perspective, this is neither relevant to the Quad, nor will it have any impact on its functioning.
This is actually what he said before the Prime Minister left when he was asked about AUKUS and Quad. I wanted to pull out the soundbite where he said that Vice President Kamala Harris had suo moto on her own brought up the issue of Pakistan, of terror groups there, and the necessity to, put pressure on them. Akriti, last question to both of you. Will the US actually do anything about Pakistan and Afghanistan?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, please.
So I think right now is kind of a test of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. At least in my reading, we've seen Secretary of State Antony Blinken, say in hearings in Congress that the U.S. is going to undertake a reappraisal of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship because of Pakistan's activities in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, whether it is in terms of harboring Taliban leaders or sort of having what was called in the congressional hearing duplicitous activity. So I do think that there is a bit of reassessment of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship happening in Washington at the moment. We have seen previous presidents take kind of India's side in terror activity that was emanating from Pakistan and asking for Pakistan to do more to control those groups, whether it's Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba. So I think let's see how that shakes out over the last few months. But I definitely do think now that after the U.S. is withdrawn from Afghanistan, there is going to be a reassessment of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
Ambassador, last words to you. Do you think there will be a reassessment and a repositioning of policy vis-a-vis Pakistan?
I don't expect very much to happen. They don't even want to withdraw the non-NATO ally status from Pakistan, which is meaningless. But even that gesture, they find it difficult to make. And Antony Blinken said what he said because there was pressure from the congressman on sanctioning Pakistan. So he had to say something to ward off this question and evade. In fact, he evaded any clear answers to the questions that were posed to him, as it was very convenient to say that we'll review our relationship, but I don't know what that means. There are two things. One, they argue that they still need Pakistan for intelligence purposes with regard to ISK and potential terrorist threats from Afghanistan. One. And number two, they have to keep an eye on Pakistan's nuclear weapons so that they don't get into the hands of the wrong kind of people within Pakistan. So these are the kind of arguments that are being given to justify.
We seem to have lost your audio, Ambassador. I think you've pressed mute. Yeah,
No.
go ahead.
I therefore don't think that there's going to be any significant change in U.S. policy towards Pakistan. In fact, President Biden is not saying anything about Pakistan. And everybody knows that the Taliban are the creatures of Pakistan, and they won't have succeeded but for Pakistan. And Pakistan has actually had a big hand in formation of this government in Kabul, especially the Haqqanis. So all this is known to the United States, and they also know that through the Haqqani group, the Pakistan has been responsible for the casualties of American soldiers in Afghanistan,
and the Indian diplomats.
And yet there has been no reaction. They don't want to sanction Pakistan.
Right. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal from London, thank you so much for giving us your time. Really appreciate your experience and your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Akriti, thank you for giving us time also on an extremely busy day for most analysts and journalists in the US.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to be here.
Bye.
Just a reminder to our viewers, if you haven't already, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, do follow our social media handles, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. This is StratNews Global. You've been watching Talking Point. I'm Amitabh. Revi.